Okay, in the last section, we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system, which will sometimes be called autonomic motor system or visceral motor system. And what is happening in the autonomic nervous system is it's sending signals to organs that we're not necessarily aware of at any time. And it's going to be responding to inputs from organs that we're not aware of all the time. And so the sensory nervous system is not technically considered part of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the motor signals that go out to these organs, but the sensory input is going to affect the autonomic nervous system. And these are going to contain or maintain our body within normal ranges and set points, and it's going to all help maintain homeostasis, but it's all done under our conscious level. So just like in the last system where we talked about senses and reflexes, we have a little image here that shows us the basic model for the autonomic nervous system. And so it's going to receive input in, and then the autonomic motor system is everything that goes out from the spinal cord, and it's going to pass through a separate ganglia, and this is an autonomic motor or autonomic ganglia. And so sometimes these ganglia are located in the sympathetic trunk, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but sometimes they're located in the walls of the organs or out closer to the organs themselves. So in the autonomic nervous system, unlike in the somatic nervous system, there's going to be a chain of 2 motor neurons before it reaches the effector. And so if you remember in the somatic nervous system, everything just went from the spinal cord all the way out to the effectors, which were skeletal muscles. So there's going to be a little difference here. And so whenever we're talking about these differences, there's going to be 2 different neurons involved, the one before and the one after. And so we'll call these preganglionic neurons and postganglionic neurons. And each one has some characteristics. So the preganglionic neuron is going to have a cell body within the central nervous system, and then a thin myelinated axon is going to go out to somewhere in the peripheral nervous system, and it's always going to release acetylcholine to excite that second motor neuron. Now the second neuron is going to have a cell body within the autonomic ganglion, and so this is not going to be within our central nervous system. It's going to have a very thin, unmyelinated axon that's going to go to the effector, which will be cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or a gland. You'll notice that skeletal muscle is not one of these because skeletal muscle is the somatic nervous system. And then there's going to be some variation here in the next step too. It could release acetylcholine or it could release norepinephrine from a synaptic knob, and this will either excite or inhibit the effector. And this is going to vary based on each different type of effector. And so on one cell of an effector, there can be multiple types of receptors. And so the effect that it's going to have on the effector depends on the type of receptors present on the cell. So here is an overview of this. So here is our preganglionic neuron, and it has the cell body within the central nervous system. And then there is that myelinated axon that's going to go out to the ganglion where it's going to synapse with the postganglionic neuron. And so here you can see the cell body is within the ganglion, and then the axon is going to extend out. And so I just made a small error, and so I want to go ahead and point it out. I called this a postganglionic neuron, but that's not exactly true because the ganglion houses the cell body. So it's actually a ganglionic neuron and a postganglionic axon. And so you'll notice here it's always going to release acetylcholine in the ganglion. And then outside of the ganglion, the postganglionic axon is going to release either acetylcholine or norepinephrine at the effector organ. So you might ask, why do we have 2 neurons instead of just 1 neuron here? And so there's a couple different benefits. It allows for neuronal convergence, and so you can have multiple preganglionic neurons go to one ganglion and synapse with one ganglionic neuron, allowing different signals or multiple different things that could excite that neuron. And it also allows for neuronal divergence, where you have multiple preganglionic neurons going to different ganglionic neurons, and so you can have one signal spread across to multiple different other neurons, so you can have one signal go out from your central nervous system and it affect a wide variety of effectors. So the autonomic nervous system is regulated by your central nervous system in the brain and the spinal cord. So the hypothalamus is a very important structure in the brain to help control your autonomic nervous system because it's responsible for things such as your fight or flight responses. And the hypothalamus is influenced by other areas inside of your cortex. And so this can have emotional responses to particular stimuli. That are going to end up affecting visceral organs that you're not necessarily aware of. So while you're not able to control your visceral organs, your emotions and conscious thoughts could affect them. And so brainstem nuclei are going to also mediate visceral reflexes such as blood pressure, and your spinal cord is going to govern some ANS reflexes such as defecation and urination. You don't need to send this all the way up into your brain to be able to defecate or urinate. This is going to all be controlled within the spinal cord. So here are some of the key players in the autonomic nervous system: the hypothalamus, the brainstem, and your spinal cord. And it just shows these areas highlighted in this image here of your central nervous system. So now your autonomic nervous system is divided up into a couple different divisions, and we're going to talk about each of those divisions. And they are your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So each one has different major functions. Your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest nervous system. So it's going to be activated whenever you're doing things after eating or whenever you're relaxing. And your sympathetic division is going to be your fight or flight nervous system, which is going to be responsible for three things: emergency, excitement, and exercise. So there's some key differences here between the two other than what I just mentioned. So your parasympathetic nervous system is going to also be called your craniosacral division. I'll show you all an image here why. It's going to have preganglionic neurons that are either in the brain stem or in your sacral region of your spinal cord. And so we'll compare this to the sympathetic nervous system, which is your thoracolumbar division, which is going to be primarily located in your thorax and your lower back. Your ganglionic neurons are going to come, since it's thoracolumbar, just from T1 all the way through L2. For your parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic axons are going to be long, and postganglionic axons are short. Sometimes those ganglia are even located within the effector organ themselves. And in your sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic axons are very short, and the postganglionic axons are very long. In these cases, the ganglia are always located close to the spinal cord. And in your parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic axons have very few branches, whereas in your sympathetic nervous system, there can be many branches. And so here is some highlights of what I just talked about. So you'll see here the orange colors are going to be your parasympathetic division of your nervous system. And the purple is going to be your sympathetic division. And so you can see that there are going to be branches coming out T1 through L2. And for your parasympathetic nervous system, it's primarily going to be cranial nerves and some nerves down here in your sacral region. And this is, again, some more images depicting the neuronal structural differences. So in the parasympathetic nervous division, there's going to be very long preganglionic neurons and very short postganglionic neurons. And you'll notice the preganglionic neuron in your parasympathetic division does not branch, whereas here in your sympathetic division, the preganglionic neuron is very short with many branches, and the postganglionic neuron is very long. So these structural differences are going to coincide with some functional differences. Since they have long preganglionic axons with very few branches, parasympathetic activity is going to stay localized. It's only going to activate a few effectors. Whereas the sympathetic activity is going to involve mass activation with those many branches that are short. It's going to end up affecting many different ganglionic neurons, and so the signal will travel through postganglionic axons. And so many different organ systems can all be activated very quickly via your sympathetic stimulation. And so sympathetic stimulation is also going to involve the release of adrenal hormones, such as adrenaline. So this will also be called epinephrine. And so sometimes, though, single effectors can be engaged, and we'll talk about some of this. And an example is like how pupil dilation can happen in response to fear, which If it's fear, it might involve multiple organs, such as your heart, etc. But if it's just in low light, then you'll just have pupil dilation only occur